Welcome to the barn. My name is Joanne Knight. Today's Barn Buddy is going to be about row 3, and I will tell you again that if you missed row 1 and row 2, you can find it on my website under the Barn Buddies and you can watch it there. Row 3 has 2 blocks in it. This is the mock-up that I did in EQ, and I'll have to tell you that Joyce helped me with this mock-up. She is a whiz at EQ. And she helped me to put this custom layout together. The quilt did end up being large, but I'm real happy with the look of it because it's not just a typical sampler quilt. If I look at a full mock-up of row 3, this is what the quilting looked like on it. This little triangle in the center was the flying geese that began to go all along the quilt. The background of it was white, and so I treated it as a regular triangle rather than treating it like a flying geese. This really pretty curved looking triangle right here, this crosshatch, this is the one that I used in all of the dark triangles that were on either side of the block. So let's go over and look a little bit at row 3 and those blocks. This block on the left side is a block that was done by Jane Williams. And this is what the block looked like whenever I finished quilting it. I wanted it to have that kind of freehand kind of look to it. And this is a pattern that looks like it's similar to that block, but it didn't quite fit the block. Whenever I placed it on there, it didn't really honor the piecing of the block, and so I decided that that probably wasn't a good one to use. If I hit F3, then I can take my image down a little bit and you can see where the lines of that pattern fit. So that was one that I decided that I didn't want to use. However, I liked the look of this one, the kind of modern look, and it went with the pearls and the curves that I was looking for. So I decided to do something different and just take a piece of it. Let me go back to F3 and make the picture just a little bit more intense so you can watch it. This pattern is by Kim Diamond. I'm going to scroll in and I'm going to go to nodes, and I want to divide out. So I'm looking for a dark pink node, and I'm going to go over to this blue one. Now, blue nodes are not a node that you can divide. However, there's a pink node underneath there. So when that mouse turns to a little cross, I can hit the letter D on my keyboard. I want to select it again, and I want to hit the letter D again. Now, I don't need any of that part of the pattern, and that part of the pattern is highlighted, so I'm going to hit the word delete. Now I'm going to go back to my pattern, and I want to divide in this area right here. So I'm going to go to nodes, and I'm going to hover over that node, and I'm going to hit the letter D on my keyboard. And you can see that it is just going to go round and round and round, because there is a bug that Creative Studio will not divide a curve that goes into a straight line, and it depends on the way that the pattern stitches. So what I have to do is back off of that node, go right here to this next node and hit the letter D on my keyboard. I don't want any of that part of the pattern. I do want that part of the pattern because it's part of my line. And sometimes you have to just keep dividing until you get what you want with the pattern. Select this one, hit the word delete. And what that leaves me with is this pattern right here. But I still have this extra. And if I go back to nodes and I hit the letter D, you can do that all day long and it is not going to divide for you. So let me show you the workaround. I'm going to go up to this node and I'm going to hit the letter D. And while this part of the pattern is selected, I'm going to right click, I'm going to go down to convert, and I'm going to convert pattern to curve and left click. And when I do, it's going to unselect it. If I select it back again and I go to nodes, now I can go to this node and I can hit the letter D on my keyboard, and yes, that is the same node. And now I can delete that, and now I have my pattern that I wanted to be able to fit in that space. I haven't changed the sewing order of it. I have simply divided that out. It is multiple patterns, so I am going to select it, and I can either combine it or I can select one part of it and order join to make absolutely sure that that pattern is going to quilt the way that I want it to quilt. That's a real good safety check. Now I'm going to combine it so that I can pick it up and move it. The next thing that I did was take this pattern and put it in the center. I'm really liking drawing an X boundary, and what I would do is draw an X boundary for this particular square, or turn my snaps off. I could either draw that X boundary just like this, because I didn't need it for pattern to boundary. I only needed it to be able to see where the center is. So I could do that and draw an X boundary and put this pattern in there. That's an easy way to do it. Or I could use my piece of grid. Let me hit Control Z because it decided to delete on me. That's what I did on that one. This red area right here, I used my hopping foot and did draw lines so that I was about 1/4 of an inch off of the seam lines with that one, just to be able to give me a little channel, because the green ones had a channel. So I wanted it to look like those were a channel as well. And then I took this pattern by Nancy Hackey, fit it to where it needed to be within those lines, and just quilted that out. So that's about as hard as this particular one was. This is the pattern that I used for the background areas right here, and then one more little half square triangle pattern from Joyce to be able to go in the outside areas. It makes the background of the block look like texture and focus on the colored parts of the block. And I like the way that this pattern, and this pattern all had the pearls on them, and the pearls went kind of from the outside in, but it still gave you some variety with this pattern in the red areas. So that's Jane Williams' block. The next block in that section is Ramona Hill's block, and I don't know who made all of these blocks, but the ones that I do know, I really want to honor those folks and mention their names in the Barn Buddy videos. This one just was so easy. I love these patterns by Joyce that are the modulars that have the channels in them. Some of them have a wavy edge on the outside. Some of them have pearls in them, and I have a pearl fetish, and I love the way that this triangle looked in this block, and it's a point-to-point pattern, so it's nothing more than selecting the pattern and doing point-to-point around that block. That's all it is. Now, typically, what I will do on a block, because I did do stitch in the ditch around these blocks, so typically what I would do is place this pattern in the 4 corners and quilt that pattern. Then I'm going to take this pattern and I'm going to put it on either side. These are actually flying geese. And I put it on either side and I quilted that one. And you can see that I had to do it individually because this pattern starts and stops on the end. So the start and stop of the pattern was out here in the seam line. So those had to be quilted individually. I can use nodes on this pattern right here, and I can adjust those nodes, or I can draw a boundary and do fill, either one. I loved this pattern by Nancy Hackey in the center. I thought a long time about what to do in the center of that one, but I just loved the way that one looked, a little bit like thread painting at the top and the bottom, and it just really fit that block. This pattern in the teal triangles, there's one thing I want you to notice about that. These two patterns look the same, and they are pretty much the same. But what you have to be aware of is where the start and end of the pattern is. If I switch to these handles, the F11 handles, you can see that this is a valid point-to-point pattern. It starts on the left and it ends on the right. This one is also a point-to-point pattern, but it ends in the center. So to be able to quilt these out and do them without stopping, which is kind of the name of the game, you want to choose this pattern. Even though it has a travel line in the seam line, you want to choose this pattern, because then you can click it out and it will sew in one continuous motion instead of stopping and starting every single time on this pattern. So those are the kind of things that you want to be aware of whenever you are choosing patterns to give yourself a little bit less work. I love each one of these blocks, and it was really fun to figure out what I would do in them and how I would set them up and to make sure that the density matched for the whole quilt. I picked a lot of patterns. I chose to put them in a collection for this particular quilt so that whenever I searched for my patterns, I could just search by collection and be able to bring up the collection and not have to weed through all of my patterns to see which ones I wanted to use. And you can see I have 709 patterns in that collection. That doesn't mean that I used them all, but it sure made it a whole lot easier to sort through them and choose the patterns for the quilt rather than going through every pattern that I have. So with that, that ends the look on row 3, and next time we'll go over row 4. Thank you.